Well, hello. Thanks for joining me. This is the Mental Health Podcast. I'm Kevin Frankish. Very interesting show for you today. There is a new study out of the University of Edinburgh about people with depression. And it says adults with a history of depression develop long-term physical conditions about 30% faster than those without. It was quite an extensive study. We're going to discuss how extensive. I'm going to be talking with one of the authors of that study, Kelly Fleetwood from the University of Edinburgh, about what the numbers mean and why those of us who live with depression seem to get sick a little easier and perhaps a little more often. The mind-body connection right now on the Mental Health Podcast. Well, hi, Kelly. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me.
Oh, thanks very much for having me on the podcast.
This is really going to be an interesting talk because we're going to be dealing in facts and science and data, which is kind of a departure from sometimes how we deal with mental health. We're going to be talking about actual figures and numbers here because we want to point out you are a statistician.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, so let's talk about this study. This is a pretty extensive study. This isn't we surveyed 100 people, top 5 answers are on the board kind of study. This was an extensive study. How extensive?
So we used data from the UK Biobank cohort, which is a fantastic resource. So way back sort of about 2 decades ago, about 500,000 middle-aged and older adults in the UK kindly volunteered their time to participate. And they came along to a study centre, answered a lot of questions about their health and lifestyle, and then underwent a variety of clinical assessments, such as having their blood pressure measured and other things like height and weight. And then we've been able to follow them up through their medical records for seven years. So in this sort of study that we conducted, we could include data from about 170,000 people.
So the essential result is that people with a history of depression tend to develop long-term physical conditions 30% faster than those without depression. Am I sort of encapsulating that right?
Yep, that's perfect.
So explain that to me.
Yeah, so I guess one way of looking at it is to say that for every for every 3 conditions, someone without depression would develop, someone with depression would develop 4 conditions. So it's sort of like a 3 to 4 ratio for people without depression versus people with depression. I think a really important thing to remember about all of this research is that we're talking about things on a population level rather than an individual level. So this doesn't mean that every person with depression is going to get more long-term physical health conditions than every person without depression. This is just on average. And of course, some people with depression will have good physical health, and some people without depression might have poor physical health as well. So, we're just talking about, on average, what happens to a population.
But it does really make us think and perhaps maybe rethink the way that we deal with mental health. There's always been silos, hasn't there? Our mental health. We go see a psychiatrist or a therapist. But if we have, a broken arm or something, we go see a medical doctor. And perhaps what the numbers are showing us is that somewhere we've got to merge these two disciplines.
Yeah, that's so right. I mean, I'm based here on the main hospital campus in Edinburgh, and here we've got the adult general hospital, the pediatric hospital, but it's a 20-minute bus ride to the psychiatric hospital. It's on a completely different campus. And, I think that sort of underlies a lot of the whole approach to physical and mental health, that they're treated completely separately. But what a lot of research is now showing is how interlinked they are.
And you've looked at similar data sets for almost a decade now. So my guess is you're not overly surprised by the findings of this latest study.
No, I mean, I think before I sort of started applying my data skills to this area, I thought I was sort of reasonably well informed, but actually when I first joined this team, I was really surprised that there was such a big gap in physical health for people with and without a mental illness. But yeah, certainly all of the research our team and others have done over recent years consistently shows this gap. So some other work which we're hoping will be out soon is looking at life expectancy. And we see a similar pattern that people with a mental illness sadly have a shorter life expectancy than people without a mental illness. So the gap exists in all areas of physical health.
Now, when we talk about people getting sick, are we talking about you're just going to get a cold more often? You're going to get the flu more often?
So in our study, we looked at long-term chronic physical health conditions, so not sort of short-term things like cold and the flu, but more long-term things such as asthma, arthritis, diabetes, cardiovascular conditions like heart attack, for example.
And hypertension as well. Was mentioned in that study.
Yeah.
I mean, that one makes sense. I can understand someone with depression, suffering from hypertension. But when it comes to osteoarthritis or acid reflux or the fact the numbers show to that, can you delve into that just a little bit more? Like these don't seem to be connected to mental health.
Yeah, I guess. So I guess what we did in our study is we looked at an overall count of the number of conditions people develop. So we didn't look at every single condition individually. So I couldn't tell you whether it differed for every single condition. That was in the 69 conditions that we looked at. But we certainly know from other work that things like type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease are more common in people with depression than without. But I think, there's so many factors that link depression to physical health. So, something like arthritis, we could perhaps, I think there's some theories around it's potentially due to inflammation. It could be, just general lifestyle factors that affect people with depression.
And I guess that we could also link some of these to government savings, to medical health savings, that if perhaps we treated mental health, which is a lot cheaper to treat than say arthritis is or hypertension or any sort of heart disease, that we could save a lot of money if we paid attention to this study.
Yeah, I mean, I guess so that would need another study to look at the costs, and it's always quite complicated. But I think, it would be wonderful to see a sort of preventative approach here where we're looking at, creating conditions where people are less likely to develop mental illness such as depression, and then also a preventative approach in terms of really investing in the physical health of people with depression, so that's getting more regular screening or screening at a younger age than people without depression.
Now, I said I wanted to circle back to what you had mentioned before, and that was life expectancy. Is that the next direction for this study?
So that's one thing that we've looked at. So we see a sustained gap in life expectancy in Scotland between people with and without a history of a severe mental illness. But I think going forward, I'm working in a new team which is interested in metabolic psychiatry. So particularly, I'm going to be using health data to look at metabolism in people with severe mental illness. And other colleagues are doing some really interesting stuff looking at interventions, such as the ketogenic diet for people with bipolar disorder.
So where do we go from here now? What kind of contact have you had with your medical counterparts so far?
So I guess like what we'd like to see is a more integrated and more equitable health system where people with depression are sort of getting more help with their physical health, to even things up and make things a bit fairer for people. And I think something that always stands out to me is that we've known in the sort of scientific community about these disparities for at least a couple of decades, but nobody's really seemed in a big way to be able to shift the needle on these disparities. So I think, hopefully in the future we'll see a lot more joined up thinking in terms of care for people's physical and mental illness and interventions that can help with both, better integrated health systems, just a better understanding of the public in general of the relationship between physical and mental health.
Were you able to see any correlation during this study about other mental health conditions, such as anxiety, perhaps even into some of the more serious conditions, such as bipolar or dual personality? Is there any way yet to see any of these numbers and their relationship?
So not in this study. So I guess the numbers of people with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder is really small. It's about 0.5% of the population. So in order to look at those conditions, you need really big data sets. So the UK Biobank is amazing because they collected loads of information from participants at the start of the study. So we know way more about people in the UK Biobank study than we do from just, say, looking at people's hospital records or GP records. So the UK Biobank is brilliant in that respect, but it doesn't have the same numbers. And really to look at other conditions like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, we need to work with sort of population level data. So to look at data for the whole of England, for example, to understand those diseases.
And it's interesting. We should point out too, because we are talking to you from Edinburgh, that the UK actually has surpassed many other nations in at least giving some validity to mental health issues, where they have a minister of loneliness. There's a minister who is I can't remember who it was. I knew it was. I can't remember, but they have a minister of loneliness. So they are realizing that mental health is a significant and serious issue. And this study only verifies that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting. Loneliness was one of the things that was captured in the UK Biobank study. This is not something we usually get in electronic health records. And we do see associations between loneliness and depression and the development of physical diseases. So yeah, it's really important one to think about.
So where do we go from here now? You're going to be looking at life expectancy, but where do we take this? What can we learn from it? Maybe even, is there anything our listeners can learn from this?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it really depends sort of on what level, like sort of a government level or individual. It would be great, I guess, if this was picked up by more medical professionals, so they were more aware of the risks people with depression have in terms of their physical health. And I think as individuals, the same advice for people with depression as for anyone else in terms of making sure you keep up with recommended health checks and cancer screening, and follow guidelines for diet and exercise, for example.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? That being forewarned is being forearmed, and so it's perhaps it's a wake up call to everyone that if they are living with depression, that they're doing more harm by not treating it or not taking care of it.
Yeah. I think it definitely highlights the importance of people with depression looking after their own physical health. But also, I think it's really important not to put the pressure on the individual and really to look at it from a wider health system perspective of how can we help to support people with depression to have better physical health.
All right. Anything else you want to add? Anything else about the study that you found interesting? Perhaps there are more questions to be asked about something that you found out about as well?
Oh, that's a good question, but I can't think of anything else to add off the top of my head.
Because this wasn't all that surprising, was it? I mean, the results of this, like you have the numbers now to back it up, but it just isn't all that surprising.
No, it's interesting because I guess you with your podcast and me with my research, we're really aware of this, but it's sometimes I think people in the wider public don't always know about the relationship between physical and mental health. So it's nice to get the opportunity to talk about it today.
Yeah, because we've talked about it often on this program that most of the hormones that we produce that make us happy or regulate our mood are made in our stomach, not in our brain as well. So the whole body is, I mean, one day I wouldn't be surprised if we found out that our feet are important for our mental health as well. It's just, we have one body.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really important message. And I think we're now more and more thinking of depression as a whole body condition instead of just a mind condition.
All right. Well, thank you so much for this time. Thank you for your work on the exhaustive work on the study. And I am sure that we're going to see the analysts and the medical researchers now combine forces to try and make a difference.
Well, thanks very much for taking an interest in our work and inviting me on the podcast today.
All right, thank you.
Thanks very much.
Okay, so now we have the numbers that prove what a lot of people already seem to feel or know. So what do we do about it? What practically can we who live with depression do with this information? For that, I'm going to Laurie Hales, who is a learning and organizational development specialist specializing in wellness here at Ontario Shores Centre for Mental Health Sciences. Hi, Laurie. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks for having me.
So, first question, are you at all surprised by the results of the study?
I'm not actually. I'm not at all surprised. If you think about, depression and the fact that it triggers chronic stress, and chronic stress heightens our cortisol and in turn makes us more vulnerable to sickness and chronic illness. So, no, I wasn't surprised by that.
And that's it, isn't it? We can feel it inside. In fact, we find people who are always in high spirits tend to get sick less often. So, I mean, we have that kind of anecdotal evidence right there. But what is it that's making people with depression get physically sick more often?
Well, you see, Kevin, our gut and our brain are in constant communication with each other, and depression actually disrupts gut flora. And when our gut flora is disrupted, it affects our immunity because 70 to 80% of our immunity lives within our gut. So that leaves us vulnerable to cold flus, chronic illness, what have you. And also, you might notice that like on the flip side, an unhealthy gut can actually trigger depression. So we can get caught up in this sort of vicious cycle of an unhealthy gut, depression, and vice versa.
And that's interesting too. And I have to ask you as well, because we're talking about our physical health. I know that when depression sometimes gets the better of me, I'm tired. I just want to go to bed and close my eyes. Tell me about that.
Well, that doesn't surprise me because if you think about it, like, experiencing depression can feel like carrying around a backpack full of bricks. And if you think about it, if we were carrying around this backpack full of bricks, it's really heavy. And so when we're overwhelmed, when we're mentally overwhelmed, we're going to feel that physically. And if you can think about it like your smartphone, right? And the smartphone battery. When you have too many windows open, it can really drain your battery. And your body is the same way, right? If you're mentally exhausted, you're going to feel that physically. Your physical body is going to be, or battery is going to be drained. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And so movement, a little bit more exercise. Unfortunately, it always comes to that, doesn't it? Eating better and exercise. But that movement also helps too, doesn't it?
Yes, definitely. So exercise is like a natural antidepressant. So when we exercise, endorphins are released and we feel better. Right, we have more energy.
Oh, you say endorphins are released. I don't know. I don't find them released. I just can't wait to get over it. But carry on.
Yeah. So we actually, when we exercise, our inflammation, in some cases, as long as we don't overdo it, inflammation can decrease. Our energy can be boosted. And that can happen in as little as 5 minutes.
Okay, I'm going to get you to stand by for a moment. We're going to do our call to action segment next. And we do a call to action segment every episode. And it's just one simple thing that people can do for their mental health. And so coming up, we're going to talk about one small change that someone struggling with depression, just a small change that they can make to better support their physical health. So stay with me.
Sounds good.
Okay, we'll be back.
Kids have it so much easier these days than I did growing up.
Well, according to the Canadian Mental Health Association, adolescents today report higher rates of depression and anxiety than adults. In fact, suicide is a leading cause of death among adolescents. Ask your doctor about the Adolescent Inpatient Program at Ontario Shore Centre for Mental Health Science. Our specialized team provides holistic care and ensures you to stay on track with your schooling. Learn more at ontarioshores.ca/adolescents.
We're back on the Mental Health Podcast, the Mind-Body Connection. I'm being joined right now by Laurie Hales, who is a learning and organizational development specialist specializing in wellness here at Ontario Shore Centre for Mental Health Sciences. Okay, before the break, we promoted the call to action, and the call to action you're going to share with us right now on improving our mental health is, what is a small change that someone can make right now who is struggling with depression, someone can make today, right now, this moment, to support their physical health?
Yeah, Kevin, really all it takes is a 5-minute walk, one more glass of water, even getting to bed 5 minutes early every night. Just making those small changes, those can have huge benefits. So it isn't something that we don't have to make life-altering changes. It's just small changes will go a really long way.
And I know people can get sidetracked so easy. You make these small changes, you feel better, something knocks you off track, and then you lose all that momentum. So it's a matter of try again, I guess. It is.
It's get right back on and, again, continue with these small changes.
All right. Laurie, thank you so much for this time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Kevin.
And with that, we come to the end of this episode. If you want to talk about something you heard here today or you would like to see in future episodes, send me an email. I read them all. The Mental Health Podcast at ontarioshores.ca. So send the emails to the Mental Health Podcast at ontarioshores.ca. Thank you so much for your time. And until next time, take care of yourself and take care of each other.